You're not afraid of the dark, are you?
My God, it's full of stars.
Quite an experience to live in fear, isn't it?
You have to consider the possibility that God does not like you. He never wanted you. In all probability, he hates you. This is not the worst thing that can happen.
It isn't.
There is a greater darkness than the one we fight. It is the darkness of the soul that has lost its way. The war we fight is not against powers and principalities. It is against chaos and despair. Greater than the death of flesh is the death of hope, the death of dreams. Against this peril we can never surrender. The future is all around us, waiting in moments of transition to be born in moments of revelation. No one knows the shape of that future or where it will take us. We know only that it is always born in pain.
Good tidings, my true seekers. Welcome back to Coffee, Cigarettes, and Gnosis, the always approachable, comprehensive, and affable discussion about the world's favorite and least known heretics, the Gnostics. As is customary, we will strive to stay away from scholarly pontification and definitely try and stay away from New Age babble. We'll take the middle path through the gnashing rocks of orthodoxy in this frank discovery about Gnosticism and its brethren in the esoterica. And that's not the only needle we will thread, as you might have figured out by now. We must career in between good and evil, law and chaos, right and wrong, conservatism and liberalism, theism and atheism, Ginger and Marianne, and all the other lower syzygies that grind out conflict until we have drowned in disinformation.
They're so black, it's like, how much more black could this be? And the answer is none.
No, the goal here at the virtual Alexandria is to rise above all dualities, unite them once we tower above them, and synthesize them into greater beggaring truths. In that event horizon of transcendental awareness is where we will find the liberation of the consciousness and the sobriety of Gnosis.
It's the weirdest thing. I feel like I've been in a coma for about 20 years, and I'm just now waking up.
My name is still Miguel Connor, otherwise known as your host Abraxas, that terrible god above God as the ancients knew him. And you are all gods in the becoming. For here at Coffee, Cigarettes, and Gnosis, we don't steal fire from the gods, because that fire was our inheritance to begin with. And we're keeping our damn livers too, thank you very much. And thank you so much for emanating yourselves on this Sunday, November 12th. If you get a chance or 20, please visit my website, thegodabovegod.com. for all the latest tittle-tattle of the revolution I began in the name of Hypatia of Alexandria.
There is no price for individuality.
Not much of my drivel today, my beloved true seekers. Why? Because returning to the virtual Alexandria is Acharya S., author of The Christ Conspiracy, Sons of Gods, and the new Jesus Who, a short but precise book about the canonical Jesus and why he just doesn't cut the mystical mustard anymore. It's a short book you could put in your back pocket, just in case you ran into a Christian apologist strung out on crystal meth after a lawn massage.
We all come into this world with our little egos equipped with individual horns. If we don't blow them, who else will?
Acharya's works aren't just groundbreaking, but they're mind-expanding, risky, and unapologetic.
Yes!
She wears her emotions on her sleeves and uses her high intellect like a laser katana. She has made the Jesus myth theory a cool endeavor while making mythology just plain cool and poignant once again. I could go on about one of my favorite true seekers and freethinkers, but let me just say that the Christ Conspiracy was like manna from hell for me when I was just embracing Gnosticism and divorcing orthodoxy. It was like that spiritual and mental enema I had needed all my life, and it cleansed all the toxins of the Orthodox mean that are so hard to expel.
A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. I have no bird, I have no bush. God has taken my bird and my bush.
Besides the pelf of information she granted me, Acharya also taught me that being radical, imaginative, reverent of the mysterious, and taking no prisoners can coexist within your worldview. So today I feel real horror show that she returns to talk about an overlooked figure that was not only a colossus and celebrity in early Christian days, but might have been the blueprint for the Orthodox Jesus. I'm talking about Apollonius of Tyana. She'll explain why a man that was like the Elvis of his days was censored even more heavily than my patron saint, Simon Magus. Many of you might be wondering by now if I have like a deck of proto-messiahs that I use like a Magic the Gathering card for the show. When does it end? We've had Simon Magus, Orpheus, Tuthmosis, various Joshuas, and the Joshua himself, a pantheon of dying and rising god-men, just to name a few, and I'll admit that more are in my deck for future shows.
You're working too hard. You're seeing conspiracies that don't exist. Yeah? Or maybe just getting too close for comfort.
How many composite characters does it take to screw in a Jesus light bulb? Well, you're missing the point then. Remember, Gnosticism is depth psychology, Middle Platonic philosophy, and vibrant mythology all rolled into one. Myth, right now, being the key word. In myth, we're not concerned too much with facts, but with being touched by the myth itself, which in reality is the inner, secret language of our spirits. Let me quote from the Jungian psychologist's book, June Singer, a wonderful book called A Gnostic Book of Hours. But I contend that myths are true expressions of our inner selves, revealed cryptically in image, symbol, and metaphor. They are something like dreams. Rationally, they may not ring true, but in a psychological sense they express people's inner processes through the use of ingenious devices that conceal what must be concealed and reveal what must be revealed.
If I'm not me, who the hell am I?
The Orthodox Jesus myth, for what it's worth, and it certainly has some worth, has stifled the collective unconscious of mankind for so long we are parched for more hero images of antiquity. And each hero, each messenger of light or messianic exemplar, speaks to each one of us differently in a very personal, intra-psychic way. Like Jesus, they are projections of our inmost virtuous qualities that can be reflected back to purify our lives.
You were looking for a way to change your life. You could not do this on your own. All the ways you wish you could be, that's me. I look like you want to look, I fuck like you want to fuck, I am smart, capable, and most importantly, I'm free in all the ways that you are not.
Furthermore, why do people need something material to prove the spiritual? Why did Jesus have to come in the flesh instead of dying and rising in each one of our hearts? Hell, the Pauline corpus is filled with St. Paul's dualism of keeping flesh and spiritual matter segregated. So don't worry too much about who existed and who didn't. Like Alan Moore said, all history is fiction. Search for historical truth and your thirst will never end. Thirst for the truth and your history will never end.
But where is it written that all our dreams must be small ones?
Think of our dark odyssey as letting into our warm homes these great archetypal figures that have been left out in the cold and dark far too long. And they will help us reach the heights that only the Acharyan wings of myth can provide. As Joseph Campbell said, the purpose of myth is to become transparent to the transcendental. And when you become transparent to the transcendental, you will find the Christ within you. or perhaps the King Arthur, or the Han Solo, or the Medea, or the Mary Magdalene. And like them, like the constellations that represent the old gods that are returning, you will become a frozen yet Tiffany beacon, forever resurrected in the sublime now. And you'll never walk alone. And when you come to the shadow of the valley of death, it won't matter what's on the other side, because you will have become timeless. Did I say there wasn't much of my drivel for me to say today? So, enough of my drivel. On to Acharya S taking on Apollonius of Tyana.
What are you laughing at? Everything you have is going to burn.
And he put his hands on me, and I opened my eyes, and I was baptized and became Paul. It's about Jesus of Nazareth. He was not the son of Mary, he was the son of God. His mother was a virgin, and the angel Gabriel came down and put God's seed in her womb. That's how he was born. And he was punished for our sins.
Did you ever see this Jesus of Nazareth after he came back from the dead? I mean, with your own eyes.
No, but I saw a light that blinded me, and I heard his voice.
You're a liar.
I don't care whether you're Jesus or not. The resurrected Jesus will save the world, and that's what matters.
Those are lies. You can't save the world by lying.
I created the truth out of what people needed and what they believed. If I have to crucify you to save the world, then I'll crucify you. And if I have to resurrect you, then I'll do that too, whether you like it or not.
I won't let you. I'll tell everyone the truth.
You started all this, now you can't stop it.
Okay, this is Coffee, Cigarettes, and Gnosis. With us today is Acharya S, and we already have been talking for 10 minutes, so this is kind of a sort of a fake introduction. How you doing, Acharya?
Oh, I needed to be warmed up, and as you can hear, possibly, I've got some really rowdy music in the background.
Oh, I can't hear anything, but music's always good.
Then if I go closer to it, you will.
Okay, no problem. We can have a soundtrack. No problem with the soundtrack.
Some rowdy rock and roll.
There you go.
Yeah, okay, we're doing all right here. We're doing okay. I'm just settling down after writing a very, that essay I just wrote about, it's called Sticks and Stones. My essay is called I'm Being Watched. It was very rough on my soul to read it.
Oh, I'll have to check it out. For
yeah,
sure.
What I've been doing. I actually should have checked that out because it would have added an interesting dimension to our show.
Right.
So, because sometimes people will hear me or many other people in the world speaking, and there's no context of who this person is. And yeah, a little homey stuff is nice every once in a while. This isn't exactly homey. This is me recounting the horrors that I endured for 2 years. It was, oh my gosh, not long ago. Yeah, just a couple of years ago. This was all.
Yeah, still, yeah. Must
finally,
be like yesterday.
Yeah, well, finally 2 years later, I'm able to write about it a little bit. And in the meantime, I've managed to keep up my somewhat valuable work. I think it's valuable.
It certainly is. Certainly is. I think it's valuable. Okay,
man.
Why don't we talk about the Messiah? And of course, not Jesus Christ, but Apollonius of Tyana.
Well, in my book, The Christ Conspiracy, which came out 7 years ago, can you imagine?
Yeah, you do mention, and I was looking, you do mention Apollonius a lot, but he's scattered all over the place. It's not like...
Oh, yeah, I didn't write any concentrated thing, but your questioning in this regard, prompting me about this has created... my eyeballs are already on writing an entire volume on this, because it just something jumped out on me that what is missing in this whole field. This is actually a huge piece of the puzzle that I've pushed aside for many years, the Apollonius of Tyana connection to the New Testament, because I pushed it aside because the story of Apollonius is every bit as far-fetched and difficult to believe as that of Jesus Christ, and that is one of the reasons why, over the centuries, people have claimed that the New Testament was in large part, or the Gospel story, in large part, based on the life of Apollonius of Tyana, and that Jesus Christ is a fictional character, which you and I Abraxas have discussed before, and
yes, we have.
One mind in that regard, I believe. I believe it becomes pretty evident, especially the information that I provided in my new book, online book, Who Was Jesus? That reading the New Testament is like you have to suspend belief in irrational and illogical, unnatural circumstances, all right. But even that's not all that difficult in comparison to the absurdities that are present in the story. And I highlight a number of these absurdities. I won't go into detail on that because we're not discussing the specifics of Who Was Jesus tonight in that regard. But it does all dovetail back to Apollonius of Tyana, because here was this, according to the fables, even in the 3rd century, Apollonius of Tyana supposedly lived in the 1st century. He was supposedly born around 4 BCE. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
The same year that I think it's the Lucan account in the Gospel says Jesus was born.
Yeah, it was when Herod the Great died or something.
I think that's Matthew and Luke's got the Quirinius census.
Right.
But in any event, somewhere around 4 BCE, this Apollonius is born. And then he dies somewhere around 100 CE, so he's lived about 100 years. And the story goes that he was wildly popular all around the Mediterranean. He had miracles at his birth. He raised a girl, a daughter of a Roman official from the dead, just like Jesus in the story of Jairus, the Jewish official's daughter. And there are many other correspondences between their lives. And then oddly enough, I haven't investigated this fully, but because there's more information about this than people realize about Apollonius. When you consider that this guy supposedly was being worshipped in temples erected by the emperors, you're talking about a major bit of history that has been erased.
No kidding.
Completely missing. No, I never heard of Apollonius of Tyana in school, did you?
Oh, never heard of him until I read your book, actually.
Yeah, see that? I mean, these people, when you read the accounts, if these are true, I haven't been able to verify everything, and it's very difficult, of course, because of the erasure of entire segments of history that has been perpetrated by religious fanatics over the centuries, the millennia, that this whole development with this man who supposedly was stunning enough to merit being considered a god to the point where he was installed in temples, imperial temples, is pretty significant information. And that this character also allegedly lived at the exact same time that Jesus Christ lived, and that Paul lived. The very beginning of the church, he lived the entire 1st century. That this person was supposedly widely famed for his amazing abilities that he had, mystical and mysterious and magical abilities that were considered divine, that he met with, he was friends with Titus, Vespasian, Emperor Vespasian's son, who was also an emperor, Titus, and Vespasian, that he was challenged by Domitian, and says something about Nerva, I guess, as well, was involved. Several emperors he had actually personally met, according to these biographies, that especially the biography of Philostratus is what we have remaining from the closest period to that era that he supposedly lived, that Apollonius of Tyana lived. And yet, all of this, and yet we hear nothing about him. It makes no sense at all. We have records of really insignificant people. I mean, it's not to cast aspersions on them personally, but in history, who cares? We don't hear about them. We don't hear much about them. We hear more about them than we do about Apollonius of Tyana. And when I was reading all about this stuff, I was kind of, shrugging it off, like, well, if he's not recorded in history, it must not have been very important, and it's just kind of another one of those things, another god, and so forth and so on. But these other gods, the ones that have that kind of significance, you hear about. You hear about Hercules, you hear about Zeus, you hear about Poseidon, you hear about Minerva or Athena, you hear about all the Roman gods. You don't hear about this guy. And beginning in the 4th century, early 4th century, the reason started to become clear why you don't hear about this guy when a Roman official, Hierocles, had brought forth the comparisons between Apollonius of Tyana and Jesus.
Oh.
And he was shortly lambasted by Eusebius, the early church father, who was also the church historian.
The great
and who wrote
forger.
This long screed. Yes, the great forger. And not only, I mean, he was in a really powerful position, obviously, because he was the main influence on Constantine.
Right.
Had just sat around basically battling off attacks on Christianity and while recording Christian history, probably in many cases to the best of his ability, but the best of his ability would be not so great because the people who preceded him had already woven a bunch of mendacious rot into the whole history of the church, as well as, of course, the Gospels themselves, which have been changed countless times.
Oh, yeah.
Now, you find upwards of 300,000 variant readings between not only the Gospels themselves, which like the 3 synoptists and John, but also between the ancient, or even in the last 1,000 years, the different manuscripts that they find. There's some 5,000 manuscripts, and these variant readings from one to the next. Obviously, many, many, many hands involved in the creation of the gospel story as we have it. Some of the translations now are striving to go back to the earliest texts, like the Codex Bezae, and the other was Alexandrinus. It doesn't matter, because what you're seeing is that unless the Holy Ghost, who supposedly inspired these infallible, inerrant gospels, was just like really capricious. Today I'd like to change the story. Can we put the temple cleansing before the rest of the tale? And
right.
But Holy Ghost in the synoptics, it's at the end of the story. Well, darn. Let's make it 2 cleansings of the temple then, okay? But Holy Ghost, isn't this supposed to be history we're recording here? Shh. It is history somewhere. Okay? Some cosmos. Not at all on this planet, okay? Somewhere it's history. So, yeah, I mean, that's the scenario that you get when you start looking in detail at the Gospels and comparing them to each other and to their many manuscripts that have been analyzed and found to be changed.
Yeah, slightly.
The Holy Spirit, inspiring the copyists to...
The uneducated scribes, basically.
Yes, the barely literate scribes who didn't know what they were looking at and sometimes just wrote the most ridiculous notes in the margin, and then the next edition, they suddenly find themselves in the text. You know how many times that happened? Copyist notes in the margins. Do they tell you about that in church?
No.
Uh-oh, we forgot about that part. So these are the texts that we're dealing with when we're trying to analyze the life of Jesus. And Paul as well, because Paul factors into the whole Apollonius story. Now, I can't go into all the details about this because we have limited time today. I have created, at your inspiration, my muse.
Oh, thank you. And it's a wonderful essay. It's at truthbeknown.com at Apollonius HTML, and yeah, you break it down, the parallels to the T. I mean, you'd have to be completely taken over by the Christian virus not to see that there is something. There's a big connection, a huge connection.
Yeah, this story becomes this is like the smoking gun in some ways. If you could only peel open some of the archives, Vatican archives or something. But, what I've done is I've created a chart with all of the correspondences between the 3 characters, Apollonius, Jesus, and Paul. And it looks like I'm going to be writing a book on this. I have a title already. I don't want to say it because it's a little bit catchy, I suppose.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Well, I wish there were more of me. I could clone myself to do all these things at once. Is it?
Yeah, no
time
kidding.
consuming.
Yeah.
But you did inspire this. It is a truly
Wonderful.
impressive bit of work when you look at it and you say, whoa, Look at these things. Like the journeys, for example, Apollonius' journeys are so corresponding to those of Paul. And that opens up a whole can of worms, because Paul clearly in his epistles to Corinth and the Ephesians, the Corinthians, these are all really strong sites of the brotherhood, the mystery schools, the religious brotherhood that existed all around the Mediterranean, that was headquartered at Alexandria and Rome, but Alexandria, at the University of Alexandria, there was a very populous religious school there, and people coming from all over the known world, very far out from even like Singapore or wherever in India, possibly even China, we don't know, and possibly the New World, because there's always been evidence that Phoenicians and others made it to the New World long before the Europeans.
Right.
So Romans too.
Right,
There's
and also
supposedly Rio de Janeiro port.
Wow. And what you mentioned too, Acharya, which is also very interesting, you mentioned in a past interview, not only did Paul and Apollonius take the same route, but so did Orpheus. So do you think we have like some sort of blended legendary, or do we think we have some sort of mystery brotherhood that has to go around spreading these mystery cults?
Well, I'm entirely convinced that you had a proselytizing group, at least one, but there's one that's well recorded. The Dionysians were traveling around these brotherhood centers. These all had pagan temples up there for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, prior to the Christian era. Corinth, obviously, is a big center of Greek religion. Ephesus, well, when Paul went there, supposedly, in Acts, we hear this story in Acts, he was cutting into the sales of the pagan idols, and the Ephesians went berserkers on him, which I think is maybe the reference to the wild beasts he fought in Ephesians. Oh, oddly enough, Apollonius also fights wild beasts at Ephesus.
Oh, what a surprise.
Oh, yeah, isn't that a surprise? Shipwrecked, travels the same route as Paul, casts out demons. Paul casts out demons. Jesus drives out demons. Let's see, what else? Founded a religious community at Corinth. Apollonius. Paul founded a religious community at Corinth. What it looks like when you start going through all of these correspondences and the journeys, yes, the journeys where he goes to these various mystery schools. In some of them, supposedly he's at Apollonius and Paul are at Ephesus and Corinth at the same time.
Oh,
and even in the Bible, there's mention of this contracted name Apollos in the New Testament.
Yeah, he was Paul's. He was Paul's like enemy, or he was competing.
No, he was one of his buddies, Apollos.
Oh, he was.
But it looks like Paul is Apollonius, as is Apollos, and I haven't figured out how they split it up in those quotes when they actually mention Apollos. Apollos is a contraction of Apollonius, and you have to wonder if they're both at Ephesus and Corinth at the same time. And this is really history in both stories. Could they really have missed each other?
No.
They don't know who each other is.
Yeah.
It just starts to look like is when the Christian conspirators, as I call them, started to put. It's a very complicated process. Nobody just sat down and said, "Oh, let's make up a story about the Jewish Messiah and place it into history."
Right.
It took centuries. There were centuries of practicing before that had happened. In the Old Testament, there's much evidence of this priestcraft, well studied, well practiced priestcraft, and especially in the pagan world. The Jews were very isolated and somewhat backward, and they glommed onto it real fast. They're fast learners. So they basically whipped up this competitive character, especially competing with Apollonius, not only competing with, but usurping some of the qualities, the characteristics of Apollonius, as well as Paul's character being based largely, I believe, on Apollonius. Interestingly enough, Apollonius disappears around the year 30 CE or AD, which is when Jesus was said to have died.
Right.
And then he reappears in the biography all of a sudden, cuts out 20 years from age 30 to 50, which is right about when Paul surfaces.
Oh.
It's a very interesting correlation. I have not been able to confirm whether or not the biography does follow, or the biographies do follow this pattern, but certainly we know the Christian pattern, but the Apollonian one I don't know specifically. I haven't done that much research in this area yet, although obviously it's significantly more than the average bear.
Right, and you've only just begun. But here's the question. So you have, you've got Orpheus running around spreading the Dionysus God-man. Then you've got Paul going around spreading around the Joshua God-man. Who was Apollonius' patron god, or what was his message?
Well, you got Paul spreading, you got Dionysus. This is, who's claimed to have the epithet IES before the Christian era, which is, of course, if you put the US on it, it becomes Jesus in Latin, IESUS, and it means Savior. Now, so you have Orpheus running around proselytizing the Savior God in the very same areas around the Mediterranean that Paul's journeys take and that Apollonius' journeys take. And you have then structured, organized religious centers, such as at Ephesus and Antioch. Paul and Apollonius at Antioch at the same time. How odd. And we don't know each other, unless, of course, Paul is a real person, and the Apollos he's referring to in the New Testament is Apollonius. But it's just odd that that their lives are so intertwined, and that there's no mention of correspondences. There's no mention in Philostratus' biography of Apollonius of Christ, Paul, Christians, Christianity. No mention at all. In other words, in recording Apollonius' journeys to the very same sites where these brotherhoods had their strongholds, and they were said to have been Pauline in origin, but obviously long pre-Christian, that there's no mention of him encountering Christians along the way, having any kind of flack from them. He's trying, he's actually specifically bringing his message of Greek culture to the barbarians, and he doesn't butt heads with these people. He's in Athens, where Paul is addressing the Areopagus, which is the main governing body, and he doesn't butt heads with him. And he's he's hanging around with emperors. He's not an insubstantial person who nobody's heard of. He's hanging around with emperors, Apollonius is. And Paul, too. And oddly enough, both of them imprisoned in Rome and miraculously escaping. Wow, there must have been a rash of holy men imprisoned in Rome and miraculously escaping at that time. So where do we get all these martyrdom stories from, then? If all the Christians were miraculously escaping, or the holy men were, how could there be any martyrs? But anyway.
Yeah. And especially with those two guys and their egos, it would have been impossible for them not to butt heads if they actually existed. You know what I mean? Who would you give, who do you think is the most historical viable character, or do you still see them as three conjunctions of some solar god?
Well, I definitely see that solar attributes are woven into the tale of Jesus Christ. I think there's no doubt about that, because we can look at, as exemplified in this newest video on YouTube. Have you seen that one that we did?
Yes, I have. I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, Son of God. It's gotten
very good.
It's gotten quite a few hits. But anyway, that this general outline of Jesus Christ's life is that of the sun god, which people don't realize was also extremely ubiquitous, very popular, hugely widespread, an enormous cult, if you will, enormous sun god solar religion. It's just beyond our scope these days, because it's been totally minimized to imagine how large this was and how important it was. It was everything to the priesthood at the time. So to think that this Jewish guy just came along, wowed everybody, took over the established religions, it's beyond naive.
Yeah.
It's pathetically childish, and yet it's seductive. I've fallen into the thinking myself many times as I've studied it over the decades now, and I think it's quite amusing that happened. But when I start dissecting the gospel story, then I come back out again and go, this is just nonsense. It's not even presented very nicely. But anyway, yes, you have the major aspects of Jesus' life based on solar mythology. Now, it's possible, too, that there's some solar mythology in Apollonius's tale, because it was hard to escape those. I'm saying it's so enormous, the solar religion, that the emperors based their lives on it. Astrology was a big factor. Astrology going well beyond casting horoscopes. Astrotheology was ever present. And people's lives, such as divine men, gods on earth, like Apollonius and others, were very much cast in the role of the sun god, which was the god. The eyes of the one eye of the god, and the moon is the other eye of God. You have two aspects of the solar religion. One is the sun itself, the visible sun of itself. But then there's the power, the emanating power behind it, and that's where people get a little confused. The whole thing gets confusing, because there was this concept of monotheism long before the accepted history provides, and yet behind this one was extended into the many. So that concept has always been in humans' brains, I think, since they evolved to this point of Homo sapiens sapiens. I think it's obvious that some people among the species, even going back 100,000, 200,000 years ago, some of them were going to have different parts of their brains function differently. Some are going to be smarter than the others. There were geniuses among them. They had the same size brain as we do today. There's no difference between us and them. Physically, and so there's no reason why they wouldn't have people with 200 IQs. And I would be willing to bet that a lot of those higher IQ people, 140 above genius level, were in the priesthood. They were the artisans. I think what we're seeing here is, in large part, there was a guy named Apollonius. That's what I'm finding, because there was such an extraordinary effort to make him disappear. If he was just an inconsequential pagan god, became inconsequential, I should say, because prior to the Christian era, they were very consequential. Like Hercules, there's no concerted effort to erase Hercules from history. He was dismissed as either a demon or a myth. And so, there was no need to erase him. And he was very prevalent in everything. So, but he was around a lot longer than Apollonius. The effort to erase Apollonius came shortly after his existence.
Right, and the pagans also, the pagans themselves accused the Christians of stealing the characteristics of Apollonius and giving them to Jesus. That right there is very telling. As
early as the early 4th century, 300 or so, when Heracles came out with his book, and Eusebius jumped all over him for it. So, yeah, you had this guy who seems well attested in history, although we don't have, to my knowledge yet, so far, I have not seen anything that's contemporaneous with him, other than the New Testament, or the Pauline epistles, I should say. Because what it looks like, and what I touched on in Christ Conspiracy, I think I did a little bit of follow-up on that, yeah, I did, in Sons of God as well, that this heresiarch, Marcion, the great Gnostic reformer, who, in fact, was quite orthodox at the time. He was about to become the Bishop of Rome. You don't get that high up if you're some lunatic who's not proselytizing the proper stuff. So I have to think that Marcion's efforts were entirely within the scope of the church at the time, that his beliefs were not particularly different, and that they were completely reworked. We're talking the middle of the 2nd century. And Marcion was said to have, he was a wealthy person from Cappadocia, same area as Apollonius, and had traveled to Antioch, where Apollonius was supposedly well installed. He apparently had, I don't know if his library was there or in Tarsus. Oh, Apollonius, by the way, was raised in Tarsus.
Yes, you mentioned that. That is true.
St. Paul is well known as Paul of Tarsus. Also the home of a very strong Hercules cult, among others. Another very strong brotherhood town.
Yeah, the cult of Attis was very big there, too.
Dying and rising Savior God. Where could they have gotten that from?
But you also, so you think, because we emailed each other before, that what a thesis is that Marcion went down to Antioch and brought back the epistles, but they might have originally been the writings of Apollonius.
I think that they are the writings of Apollonius. Apollonius was recorded to have letters. There are these letters, but they're considered to be bogus. I don't know if Apollonius' letters are really extant. The ones that are extant probably shed some light on the story, too. I have to get my hands on those as well. It seems to me Apollonius is known to write letters of concerning matters of spirituality to his followers who are installed at the very places where Paul is proselytizing. Okay, now, these letters, some of them have a certain feel about them, of a formula. And it was claimed that Apollonius also got letters on his missions. He went to India, see. Rumor has it he brought back a story in probably Sanskrit, maybe Pali, of either Buddha or Krishna or both.
Right, yeah, you mentioned that in your article.
And that would not surprise me at all, because at the time, the Library of Alexandria was collecting books by the thousands. They were stopping everybody they could find. They would take the books. If somebody came into the port, they would take the books and copy them and give back the copies to the people who brought them to the port. And so they kept the originals at the library. I mean, what a crime to burn that down. What a crime.
Tell me about it. Tell me about it.
Oh, my gosh. How many people have...
We're still reeling.
I know. The repercussions of it are beyond belief. And there has to be a way to glom onto such an enormous event and not let it slip away, as it's been completely usurped. The ancient history is completely destroyed and usurped. What a surprise!
Yeah, which gave us the Dark Ages, which we're still trying to get out of.
Yeah, human barbarians.
And another thing which was pretty shocking is, where did you get the information that there's a possibility that the Epistle to the Hebrews was written by someone named Apollo?
Apollos. Well, this Apollos person who is mentioned in 1 Corinthians and in Acts, that's a contraction of Apollonius. I'm not sure exactly. I have to go find out where the earliest assertion is that he's the author of the Epistle of Hebrews to the Hebrews, because I think Martin Luther may have said something about Apollos being the author of the Epistle to the Hebrews. And it's assumed that that's the Apollos mentioned in the New Testament. Because there are, of course, many Apolloniuses, there are Apollos. By the way, Paul in ancient Greek is Paulos. So it's spelled differently. We're not that far off in sound. And also, it is claimed that and I haven't seen these things, how could I see them? The ancient Greek text of Philostratus is claimed that in the Greek, Apollonius is referred to as Paul, P-O-L. Like I say, I haven't been able to confirm these claims, but yeah, it's looking pretty sketchy here for Christians.
Right, and I think as you research more on this book, you're gonna break another dam. I think you usually do. Yes.
As I was looking around for the research on this, mostly on the net. My library is decimated, and I'm not really in an area with any fantastic library to speak of. But that's a whole other issue. But I'm looking around on the net, and I'm seeing nothing comparable to what I'm doing. Even from people who are knowledgeable of my work, and also I did see one site that looks like it was influenced by me, but also other people, because this is not the first time that people have associated Apollonius with Paul of Tarsus. Many people over the centuries have done that. And there is one site that does a study of the two. But other than that, the way I've got it laid out, taking it all the way from the perspective of thinking of Jesus Christ as a fictional character too, it's not been done. So there's a need for it, and I'm willing to do it.
Well, I'm very excited because you just in your essay, how you parallel, perfectly Paul, Jesus, and Apollonius, and then of course, if we take it one step back to Orpheus, then we've got quite a thread, a tangled web.
Oh yeah, and then there's Pythagoras.
Oh God, yeah. Then we go back to Pythagoras. And
yeah, Pythagoras I haven't even looked at, because Apollonius was compared to Pythagoras many times, and it looks like Pythagoras took that same route. In fact, Apollonius was said to go to India for the same reason that Pythagoras went, in Pythagoras' shoes, going there. Footprint, however you say it. So it looks like what happened is Apollonius traveling to the east for 3 years. Oh, Paul travels to the east for 3 years. How interesting.
Yeah, for the Arabian Mysteries.
Yeah, is that right? Does it say Paul went there for the Arabian Mysteries?
Well, that's always been my contention.
Because that's
actually Egyptian mysteries. If he was in Arabia, what else would he be doing there besides laying in the sand?
Well, that's weird because, of course, the story of Apollonius going to the east, he stops and learns the languages of the animals from the Arabian, which would be an Arabian mystery.
Right, and Apollonius knew Aramaic fluently.
There is a claim that he was not Greek, but Aramaic, that being from Cappadocia, but apparently he championed the Greek way of life as being the only civilized one. He may have spoken Aramaic, which is, of course, what Jesus was claimed to speak too. And then, of course, he taught in Greek, so Paul taught in Greek. I mean, it's really interesting. And it really looks like we had this guy, Apollonius, going to, and mind you, people are giving him divine honors. He's right up there with the emperor as being worshipped. So you have this person being given, he's hanging around with emperors, hanging around with kings. When he goes to India, he gets welcomed along the way by the highest dignitaries. He's not hanging around with the goatherds and being obscure. He's being brought into the inner court and and they offer him the world, and he renounces wealth. There's another commonality, of course. Long hair, robes.
Paul and Jesus, yes.
Wandering mendicants, a lot of them. Rubbing elbows with royalty and being given all kinds of stuff. So it's not like he was stumbling around trying to pick up a book when books were extremely scarce.
Right,
he was well appointed and brought into inner circles and no doubt swapping stories with their own priests. He was considered a religious reformer. It's quite possible he did end up with their Bible, the Indian Bible, which would be maybe the story of Krishna, maybe as found in the Bhagavad Gita, or the Puranas, specifically the Puranas, the infancy of the story of Krishna in the Puranas. So he would bring these back, and these go into the Library of Alexandria, but specifically Marcion shows up in Rome with this gospel. One gospel, the gospel of the Lord, the gospel of Marcion. And oddly enough, we find out from the church fathers that this book of his has cut out this and that. It's identical to the gospel of Luke, but it's cut out this and that. Now, perhaps, if you look a little closer, it's not that Marcion's book has cut out this and that from Luke. It's that Luke's book was based on Marcion and had this and that added to it.
Oh, I agree. That's more logical, far more logical.
Well, especially since it is claimed, nobody disputes this, that the first New Testament was published at Rome by Marcion, who was a candidate for the bishophood in Rome. Not some goofball slouch who just kind of popped into an alien and popped into the Orthodox Christian Church. This guy was heading it, and he published the first New Testament. How are we supposed to proceed with that? Are we going to throw history on its ear and say that, the book that makes its literary appearance, the appearance in the historical record, Luke, decades after the first published New Testament, there's no evidence of the existence of the Gospel of Luke prior to the last quarter of the 2nd century. There is no evidence of it. I've been looking. The only reason why it's believed to be the last quarter of the 1st century is because of the account of internal evidence that supposedly it's recording the life of someone at the beginning of that century. There's no literary evidence of its existence prior to the end of the 2nd century. Nobody mentions it. It's not found, none of its peculiarities are found in art. It's just non-existent. And that you would find, Marcion's is mentioned in the literary record before the Gospel of Luke. So how are we supposed to look at that? If we were looking at history today and we're looking at when the book appeared in the historical record, Wouldn't the one that appears first logically have been assumed to have existed first?
Yes. Yes.
Something this influential. I mean, even my book, since 1999, has made it into other books. You can tell by looking at these other books that my book was first, because my book is mentioned in them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because you have people mentioning Marcion's gospel and condemning it, like Justin Martyr. But you don't have him mentioning Luke's gospel. Justin Martyr talks about memoirs of the apostles. If you look at this really closely with a magnifying glass, it looks like it's a single book. It's not referring to the gospels. And that could be a competing version of Marcion's Gospel of the Lord. Who knows? You have to look at it really closely. You got to get in there with. You got to look at the original Greek texts that all this stuff is written in. It can get really tricky.
Yes, it's quite quite a path. But I'm glad people like you are the ones going down this road.
Well, I enjoy it. To me, it's the culmination of all my my meddling kid mystery mystery mentality, where I have to uncover everything that I see. I was an archaeologist when I was 2 years old. I stumbled upon a guy digging old bottles in the backyard of our home, nearby, like on the bordering yard, and I was fascinated. I toddled out there at 2 years old and stood there watching him dig. He was digging treasure right out of the ground. It was a treasure hunt, and that's what started me, the whole thing with me in treasure hunting, and archaeology, and digging, and
your own journey.
Well, I like it, but I'd like to be doing more active stuff. Like my publisher travels around the world going to all these wonderful sites.
Well, we like it. We like what you're doing. We do like what you're doing. So
I do enjoy doing this kind of thing.
I, for one, can't wait to see more information. Eventually, your book on Apollonius. Like I said, you'll break a whole new dimension in the Jesus myth case. And the apologists, well, like we talked, they're just not fast enough with the times, it seems. Their arguments just keep getting more older and tired, and they get so desperate. Yeah, they fall back on C.S. Lewis every time they get. That's how desperate they're getting. Like he's the golden calf.
Yes, I see. I see. So someone in the 20th century said it was all true. So therefore, yeah. Well, it's not a question of competing. That's how they set themselves up to believe. We're trying to knock them down. No, we're trying to expose what really happened because, frankly, it's refreshing. If you have a festering wound under some sort of plastic, it's just unpleasant. It's unpleasant. Let's expose the festering wound to the air, let it heal, and then we can all live a little bit more comfortably.
There you go.
There's no doubt in my mind that the Christian history is a festering wound that's hidden under plastic. It is so gnarly and so full of baloney, and this twist and that turn, and not straightforward at all. And you would think that if there was a God in heaven who was an orchestrator of this, he, the sexist he, would be interested in logic, rationality, straightforward truth, so on and so forth. But what you find is just this weaselly cat, it's strewn with garbage. It's nasty. It's like a back alley.
I agree. But anyway, Acharya, I think that's about all the time we have today. Thanks for coming on and spreading the gospel of Acharya to enlighten the masses.
The gospel of Apollonius.
Yes, we must bring the gospel of Apollonius out.
Yeah, this is actually a huge piece of the puzzle.
I agree.
Overlooked. So thank you for directing my attention so strongly at it.
Oh, my pleasure. And thanks for being on, and we will definitely talk soon.
Life has a melody, guys. A rhythm of notes that become your existence once played in harmony with God's plan. It's time to do your part and realize your destiny.
Which is what exactly?
You are the guardian and protector of the new generation of God's children. first member of our family will be with us soon, guys. It's time to make your choice.
But I don't understand what you're talking about. Really, I don't understand.
See the face with the shape of things to come.
And there you have it, my true seekers. Acharya S on Apollonius of Tyana. One thread of that astral spiderweb we are crawling along in our nascent rise to becoming gods. Let us hope that Acharya continues to tap into her muse and brings forth this enigmatic figure that might have slipped through history's fingers if not for the rise of the mythices. And she certainly is one of the most important leaders of our generation.
To protect the sheep, you got to catch the wolf. And it takes a wolf to catch a wolf, you understand?
Please visit her website, truthbeknown.com, for more information on Apollonius, the Jesus myth, astrotheology, and a maze of wonderful articles, interviews, and even videos. This is and has been Coffee, Cigarettes, and Gnosis. We are the Gnostics, the ones who, in a surge of honesty, know that we will never belong in any land or epoch or man-made dream. We are the passerbyers, but pilgrims of this universe. We have no identity except for our individuality. We are the veteran of 1,000 psychic wars, and we have set the controls for the heart of the sun. We are the you forgot about after she broke your heart and before your parents taught you to be normal. Like Simon Magus said, thou and I are but one. The end of the world already happened, and now we travel back in time to that cosmic hard drive crash and stare at the blue screen of death in order to understand the letters that are nothing but the long name we were called before we became mortal.
Someday this war's gonna end.
The revolution in the name of Hypatia has begun. I think this song lyrics, the song which is coming right up for the conclusion, puts it all in perspective, my beloved truth seekers. I found a heart in the gutter and a poet's crown. I felt barbed wire kisses and icicle tears. Where have I been all of these years? I saw political intrigue, political lies, gonna wipe those smiles of self-satisfaction from their eyes. I will wear your white feather, I will carry your white flag. I will swear I have no nation, but I'm proud to own my heart. My heart, this is my heart. We don't need no uniforms, we have no disguise. Divided we stand, together we rise. Sing it, fish!